Hello and welcome to the Sacred Womb Steaming Talk. I'm Sama Morningstar, and this is a live event that is happening as part of the Embodied Shakti Summit. And I have Laura and Gauri here with me today, and perhaps others will pop in. And this is a small, intimate group, so we have the opportunity to have more of a discussion. I'll share some of my experiences with sacred womb steaming, also known as vaginal steaming, also known as Bajos in Mexico, and the Mayan traditions. And I'm sure having many other names from all the cultures around the world that that it is practiced as a sacred form of nurturing and caring for our feminine health. And so I'll just start by introducing myself. Again, I'm Sama Morningstar, and I'm the founder of the Womb Centered Healing Temple, which is an online space for womb centered healing practitioners from around the world to come together and collaborate and offer education and services to people around the world of all genders who want to reconnect to the womb, to the source of life, both in the physical form of women's bodies who have wombs, who have uteruses physically, and also in the energetic and spiritual realms as the womb space, the creative center of our beings, even if we don't have a uterus. And anyone of any gender can reconnect with that within themselves and connect with the creative core, the source of life in Mother Earth and in the cosmos. And so womb-centered healing, because the womb is such a portal for spirit to come into physical form, it is a very direct connection place with spirit and with the creative forces of the universe. It's the place in our body that can create physical form. It's the place in our energy body, in our emotional body, in our spiritual body that can create something new. And so that's the creative center of our being. And so when we have physical ailments in the womb space, whether that's menstrual ailments, fertility ailments, anything related to the uterus, the ovaries, the female reproductive health, the masculine reproductive organs, or even just anything anywhere in that area physically, it usually corresponds with emotional and spiritual and energetic imbalances, as well as overall physical imbalances in the whole body. And so it's the center, the hub of our life force and how it flows through us and how we create energy and life force in life. And so when there's an ailment there, that's a sign of an overall imbalance in those flows of energy and the balance of energy flowing through us and how we're embodying as a spirit in physical form. So when we look at it that way, and this is a perspective that I call biomysticism, that's actually part of the title of a book that I'm supposed to be writing. And so I've begun the book about biomysticism. The Biomystical Womb is the title of the book. And many books that people have written about womb-centered healing include this mystical aspect of womb healing and the connection between the womb and spirit. And so that's a big part of womb-centered healing for me. We have it's the remedy that's needed for the approach to the body that we have been adopting as a species in recent times, that separates the body out, the physical out, from the energetic, from the spiritual, from the emotional. And so, for example, medical doctors and, modern Western medicine um, relegates anything having to do with the psyche, emotions, or the spirit to other practitioners, and really separates that out, and doesn't really speak to any connections there. And yet we're these interwoven beings, and that approach really doesn't work. And doctors that really start to meet that truth start to integrate back together with the spiritual and emotional aspects of everything, and see how that cannot be separated out. And that separation out is often a source of where medicine is failing people and not meeting their needs. And so this vaginal steaming or womb steaming is one area where we are reweaving that connection. And womb-centered healing in general is where we're, of necessity, reweaving that connection, because when we attempt to heal the womb, when there are ailments, it really requires, I find, an integrative approach, where we're addressing the emotional, behavioral, psychological, spiritual aspects of a person's life in the healing process, where we're addressing all of it. It sort of automatically happens as we start to pay more attention to the womb, listen to what the womb's needs are. And, we can do physical procedures to the womb, but if the person doesn't adjust their lifestyle and make the personal changes necessary to be more in alignment with what their emotions, their spirit, their psyche needs, then those ailments will continue to perpetuate themselves. And so that's why I'm calling this talk Sacred Womb Steaming, so that it alludes to this integration of spirit, emotion, psyche, and physical aspects of our healing process. So my teacher, Kelly Garza of Steamy Chick, recognizes this integration, and yet very much focuses on the physical aspects of the herbs, and energetic, because she works with Chinese medicine. So there are energetic imbalances that Chinese medicine works with: energy of the elements, the 5 elements, earth, air, fire, water, and metal, I think is the 5th element. Perhaps wood is one of them somewhere. I'm not as familiar with the Chinese 5 elements as I am with the 4 elements from earth-based spiritualities like Wicca spirituality and Native American spirituality, just that simply work with earth, air, fire, and water. But then there's also this 5th element of spirit or ether, that's also sometimes called the 5th sacred thing, and because each of the elements is considered sacred. And so a spirit is also one of these elements. So that does correspond with the 5 Chinese elements. So anyway, there's an energetic, in Chinese medicine, there is an energetic thing. But my teacher is self-proclaimed. She's building a bridge between the scientific medical models and these energetic Chinese medicine type models of care, and so she's more on that end of things. So she doesn't want to work with her clients on emotion. She will refer that out to a psychologist practitioner. my practice is much more integrated in that my background in healing has been more on the lines of the energy healing, the visionary healing, the spiritual healing. And even with, especially with herbs as well, that intuitive receiving the energetic medicine of the herbs and the visionary medicine and communicating with the herbs and like that. And I'm building a bridge with the medical understanding as well. So I'm one of the people that she would refer her people to do the visionary healing, the spiritual healing alongside and with the physical steaming practice. And so that's what this is about. So I'll start by sharing about my personal experience and how I began to learn about womb steaming. So let's see. For most of my 30s and into my early 40s, I was addressing my own healing process and that in a way that naturally produced up, really good womb health. So, but wasn't necessarily, well, I was doing it for womb centered reasons, but not like many women have, where they're having really painful menstruation and womb ailments like endometriosis and PCOS and all these, and severe premenstrual, you know, symptoms and things like that, or infertility. There's a lot of ways that womb specific uterine ailments draw women and people of all genders, really, ailments around the physical genitalia to and even identity, to healing processes. For me, it was around my sexuality. So I didn't have those other symptoms around my cycle or fertility, but I did have severe limitations in my sexuality. I had a lot of sexual energy. I knew how to mute that or had learned how to transmute that into creative energy out of necessity, because I would very quickly find myself limited in how intimate I could become with a lover. Not necessarily physically, but emotionally. And when my emotional intimacy limitations would come up, that would shut down my physical, sexual desires to connect with that person. And that would happen very quickly with any new lover within the first 3 months or so. And, at first when that would happen, I thought to myself, oh, this person just isn't right for me. And after that happened with several different people, very different people, I started to realize, there's a pattern here. And perhaps I need to focus my gaze inward and work on my own healing process. And it makes sense when you look back at my upbringing and the relationship that my parents had. I was very hypervigilant against reproducing. And I was very aware, having studied psychology in college and women's studies, I was very aware of how it could be very possible that I would reproduce the same kind of relationship that my parents had, which was not acceptable to me. So any whiff of it, any familiarity at all in my partners with my biological dad, and I was out of there. And so I knew I needed to heal from that early trauma. But I knew also that because I could understand how to heal intellectually, and I could talk it through and tell you the healing ways of looking at things, but it was still in my body, the trauma. And so I knew that I needed to learn how to heal my body and reprogram my body to be a different way, to turn on a different blueprint of behavior and being and feeling than I had grown up with and developed as a youth. And so I got into yoga, meditation, dance therapy, art therapy, dietary change. So I, for 10 years or 11 years, I had got my diet down to being mostly fruitarian, so 50 to 70% fruitarian. So often the first 2 meals of the day were only fruit. And then I'd have one, sometimes two vegan, low fat meals cooked in the day for 10, 11 years. And this diet produced very healthy, well, I don't know about healthy, but this reduced any menstrual symptoms, for example, womb symptoms that I may have had before. And I was also doing lots of yoga, not only asana practice, but also jnana yoga, which is the wisdom yoga. I had moved to and this is in my 30s and early 40s. I had moved to an area where I was assisting to build a yoga ashram off the grid out in the woods in Northern California, where we met every week, a very small, intimate group, to discuss not only for hatha or asana yoga practices, therapeutic practices, but also to discuss how to implement the spiritual principles of yoga into our daily lives. And we did a lot of projects together. So we were building this ashram together. And when our behavioral patterns or emotional patterns came up in the process of working on these projects together, we would take those issues into the jnana yoga class and discuss it together and strategize. Okay, how can I show up differently? What healing do I need to do? How do I need to assist myself to release this pattern that's obviously from a previous circumstance and become current to my current circumstances? So there was a lot of healthy growth, major transformation that happened. And that during that period of time, I chose a new name. I had grown so much and changed so much in my relational abilities and my whole mode of being in life. And I feel that process was essential to my womb healing, because it was the patterns of behavior and relating that I'd learned from my early childhood that were often the cause of most of my emotional pain. And what I see in clients that haven't gone through that kind of self-inquiry and integrating of their dreams and how they would like to be in the world into their actual behavior in everyday life, our wombs are really calling for us to come into alignment with our spiritual intentions, really calling for us to embody our spirit's purpose into our bodies, into our lives in a very practical and real way. And when we're still running some of the trauma-based emotional and behavioral patterns that we might have inherited and from our parents, from our grandparents, and all of that, and that creates a dissonance and is one of the causes for physical ailments. And so I had been exposed to that in one of my first womb-centered healing trainings that was specific to the womb. My first herbal teacher did a feminine mystery school training where she discussed how our symptoms that we have, for example, in menopause, severe menopausal symptoms, are an accumulation of all of the issues that our menstrual symptoms and our premenstrual symptoms attempted to get the message to us about our lives throughout our whole life. And if we don't listen, then those accumulate into severe menopausal symptoms. So as soon as I learned that from her, heard that from her, I said to myself, how can I start listening to the messages that my womb is giving me right now? When I did have some fairly mild menstrual symptoms then, but her message was, these symptoms we don't have to have pain every time we menstruate. Menstruation is a natural part of our cycle. Severe pain or even mild pain during menstruation is a sign that there's an imbalance. And so I began exploring, okay, and so that to me also, for me, the around my sexuality is where the other kinds of womb-centered symptoms came up too, because I also at that time, before I really got into the thick of this healing process, I was having chronic bladder infections and chronic yeast infections as well. So that was very womb-centered as well, and that would correspond with the time when I would become sexually unavailable to my lovers. I'd have a physical reason, right? Because I was having pain and irritation in my tissues, but it didn't necessarily, I did have menstrual symptoms at that time too, but these other symptoms were more prevalent. And so those messages, I got the message early on, okay, I need to listen to the messages from my womb space, whatever those may be, in whatever form they may come, and do whatever healing lifestyle change I need to. So the first step for me was changing my diet to alleviate these chronic infections so that I could perhaps find the romantic partner, life partner that I longed for, that I knew was there for me somewhere, and be able to show up for that kind of a relationship and be able to have a fulfilling sex life within that context too, because I had, like I said, had a lot of sexual energy. I have a lot of sexual energy, a lot of creative energy. And so the diet was one of the first things, and then I combined that with this intensive, regular attention to my behavior patterns and taking full responsibility to whatever I saw happening in my relationships with other people, resisting the urge to just blame it on them, and instead take full responsibility to what in me is somehow being magnified in them. So this comes from a principle from various spiritual lineages that talks about how whatever you have inside of you and whatever you put out into the world comes from what's inside of you, comes back to you 3 to 10-fold. My experiences is more like 10-fold. Even I've heard some say 3-fold, and I'm like, feels like 10-fold to me, because sometimes the magnification of what's going on inside seems huge. So anytime I witnessed someone else's behavior that didn't feel good to me, yes, I might need to remove myself from that relationship, and I could receive the lesson of that and say, okay, how am I in some way running that pattern inside of me? How am I treating myself that way? And therefore drawing people into my life that are treating me that way. How am I possibly treating others that way? Because that's how I'm treating myself. So of course it's going to spill out on others. And so having that group, that intimate group of where we sat together and talked about these things on a regular basis, on a weekly basis for 10 to 11 years, really helped me, and more really helped me to sort a lot of that out. And so after 10 or 11 years with that same teacher, and I had become partner, I'd found my partner in that community, my now husband, we got to the point where in any kind of intimate teacher-student relationship like we had with the teacher there, the main teacher at that ashram, there's a point when the student needs to leave the nest and really learn how to fly with their own wings. Unfortunately, that teacher was not able to gracefully facilitate that for his students. And he kind of took that personally and would sort of get really upset with people and say that their spiritual growth was stopping if they needed to step away from him or, shift their relationship with him. That was because of his shadow and his unresolved wounding that I feel, looking back on it, and even in the moment then, it was clear that he had some unresolved wounding that he hadn't addressed, and that was causing this friction in this natural process between students and teachers. So because of that, with him, we had to step away from that ashram that we built from the ground up because we needed to be true to our own growth process. And very soon after we did so, and actually before we actually did so, my womb had begun expressing dissatisfaction with things already. And that was a big part of, for me, not necessarily consciously, but I had been following the guidance of my womb all those years. And that diet and that practice had been helping the wellness of my womb. And that had been starting to change for several years. As I came into my early 40s, my menstruation had become less regular, more symptomatic. My premenstrual symptoms had increased again. And there was something more that I wanted in my relationship with my partner, more partnership than was really possible within that ashram environment, where we couldn't really focus in on our partnership because it was about being involved in the ashram. Our lives were centered around that and our relationship with that teacher. And so as we stepped away from that situation, those messages from my womb became more strong. And we happened to be living in Southern California for a period of time. And I was involved in a healing center there and got to attend a workshop by a woman who calls herself Indigimama. And she's a Mayan abdominal massage and steaming therapy practitioner. And she did a little workshop where she taught us about self-abdominal massage for our womb health and sang lovely indigenous songs to us, Mayan indigenous songs to us from her lineage while we're massaging our bellies. And it was just a lovely workshop. And she sent us each home with a little jar of vaginal steaming herbs with instructions. And I went home and I had my first vaginal steaming experience. Now I'm going to tell you what that was. I did not purchase a fancy chair. I did not put the pot of steaming herbs in the toilet and sit on it. That didn't seem right to me. I wasn't going to be receiving nourishment from the toilet. That just did not resonate with me, although that is one technique that some women use. What I did instead is I took that pot and I rolled up a towel and sort of put it around the edge of that pot of steaming herbs, and I sort of squatted and sat over the pot and wrapped myself up, and I had my first vaginal steam. And I went to bed right after that steam, 10 minutes of sitting on that pot, and slept harder than I had in a very, very long time. And now I'll tell you that steam nourishing my womb that way, I think was instrumental. I feel was instrumental in some of the shifts that happened in my life right then. I'd been living out in the woods for like 20 years. And when we left the ashram, my husband wanted to go move close to his family in LA, and we lived right on the beach. So that was like, okay, I can live on the beach. But I could not live in the city. I was a country gal, and I was trying to live in the city. We got married there on the beach. It was lovely. Um, because I wanted to be with him, and he was really reconnecting with his family after being out in the woods for all that time, and there were family responsibilities he was taking on. But I was having screaming hot flashes, and I was only 43, maybe 44. I was having screaming hot flashes where I would wake up in the morning with an intense hot flash with a screaming voice inside of me saying, get out of here, and particularly go back to Harbin, which is the community we live at now, which is a beautiful resort community out in the woods, but near enough to the metropolitan area, Bay Area near San Francisco, where there's plenty of healing clientele that come to the retreat center that I can be of service to and have a livelihood. It's hard to do that as a progressive sort of fringe type healing arts practitioner in rural, even California. There's a lot of sort of cowboy culture here that considers all that to be a lot of frou-frou nonsense. So it's hard to make a living, but having all of these progressive folks from out of town coming and visiting this hot springs resorts, I'd lived here before, I'd gone to the ashram, and that was a very sane and wonderful way for me to be not in a big city, because it doesn't work for me, and yet still have the healing clientele I needed. So I had this screaming hot flash voice saying, go back to Harbin. And yet my husband was like, no, we're here with my family and this whole thing. And so because I was able to fortify my womb with the steaming practice and fortify my womb listening practice in general by saying, this voice inside of me is valid. This voice inside of me that says, I want this for my life. I don't want that for my life. My life purpose is this, and it needs this and this and this to nourish it. Because I was able to feel that is valid, to nourish the validity of that through the steaming and that time, that self-care time, to really care for that central creative core of my being and that source of life force, which is our womb and our womb space. And I wasn't willing to sacrifice that for someone else, even though I love my husband for his vision, which was not really panning out as well as he thought it was supposed to. I was able to speak up too, and this connection between the womb and the voice is very important. So oftentimes with womb steaming, I do a lot of singing, vocalization, and like that. So that steaming really, and that experience helped me to speak up to my husband and say, look, we're not going to do this city life thing. I know we got this great place on the beach, but this and that and the other thing, and we're going to be much better off if we go move up to Harbin. And that strength of my creative knowing and my womb knowing and my womb wisdom was so strong that without me nagging him or pushing on him in any way, he eventually talked himself into the truth of what I was saying. And we moved back up to the country. And since then, I have been developing this integrative sacred womb steaming practice and diving into womb-centered healing more specifically and more intentionally through various apprenticeships. I have participated in the Womb Awakening, Fountain of Life Womb Awakening Apprenticeship, which was an online program for womb-centered healing, a very mystically integrative and integrative approach to womb-centered healing. I did it 2 times and did the teacher training twice as well with this organization, this group of wonderful practitioners, and began to shift the focus of my online business, which I knew I needed to move into for another way to support my rural lifestyle where local people weren't necessarily interested in this stuff that was so different from their belief systems, for the most part, although that's shifting. I'm very excited to share. But so this online business of being able to reach out to a wider audience throughout the world was very important. And so as I developed my womb steaming practice and my overall integrative womb-centered healing practice, I've been more and more guided to create this online womb-centered healing temple and share and teach more about womb steaming. And I've also been diving into my studies of herbalism and really learning about herbs and how herbs nourish our bodies and support our body systems, and particularly the feminine reproductive organs and systems, as well as our energetic systems and our and spiritual systems. And so I've really been diving into that. And I'm currently enrolled in Aviva Romm's Herbal Medicine for Women, and I'm doing consultations with people around that to really help develop practical dietary and herbal lifestyle systems for people to heal the womb space and heal the feminine body. But for people of any gender because it's often that feminine side of us that is ailing and showing up in particularly ailments of the genitalia or our sexuality or relational difficulties. And the herbs can be tremendously helpful for all of that. And our endocrine system. I mean, I could go on and on about all the different systems of the body that are affected by this collective suppression of the feminine that we're suffering from currently. And the imbalance, the domination relationship between the masculine and feminine, even on an individual level, regardless of what gender you associate with. And whatever gender you feel you are, there's still an inner balance of masculinity and femininity, and that healing process is a core part of my soul purpose in this life. And so the herbs help us to remember our original blueprint and essence, because they've evolved with us to give us the healing medicine and understandings that we need. And so I'm also enrolled in Kelly Garza's Peri-Steam Hydrotherapy program. So there I'm learning to bridge this, to bring this biomysticism together with the understanding of how the herbs can physically help us through steaming, through vaginal steaming. And the reason that vaginal steaming or sacred womb steaming is so effective to help us with ailments that have become physical. So I feel that ailments begin energetically and in our spirit and emotional body because of our lifestyles and our experiences, and then eventually translate into physical ailments. So we can address the physical ailments and then invite that healing into the other realms as well, because we're all integrated beings. So learning about how the steaming can benefit our physical being is like a map for how it can benefit our emotional and spiritual being as well. That's a foundational philosophy of biomysticism, as well as my personal experience, that if I'm addressing my physical well-being, it requires me to also address my emotional and spiritual well-being. And it's often a metaphor. The physical ailment is often a metaphor of what needs to be addressed in my emotional and spiritual realm. And so the steaming is very effective physically because it brings the herbs directly in contact with our root, with our pelvic floor, and the steam rises up and just gently delivers the medicine of the herbs directly to the womb space. And the warmth, the gentleness, the moisture, and the medicine of the herbs are all tremendously beneficial to that area. There are certain contraindications, for example, at times when a person would not want to steam because it could be detrimental in some way. So some examples of that are when a woman is menstruating, for example, or when a person is menstruating, because the steam can actually cause more bleeding to happen because it opens up and softens the tissues. And while we may be steaming to tonify tissues, when that steam, that heat, that moisture actually softens them and can cause excessive bleeding. So that also applies to a person who is already having excessive bleeding. So if a person is bleeding for more than 4 days in the month, whether it's prolonged bleeding during their actual menstruation, so menstruating for 5, 6, 7, 8 days, there would need to be certain formulas used to bring the bleeding down to a more healthy number of days. And if the person is bleeding more than once in the month, whether it's spotting in the middle of the month or having a whole other bleeding cycle in the middle of the month, this is a sign that the womb is not able to hold the blood in, and steaming at all when that is going on can actually exacerbate that condition. And so there are other treatments that need to take place. First, often an acupuncturist with herbs that would be taken orally can help the body to come back into balance and to not bleed so much. It often has to do with anemia. Ironically, the more anemic we become, the more we bleed. And the more we bleed, the more anemic we become. So it's this spiraling into depletion that can happen because we need the strength of the iron to firm things up at the end of the bleeding cycle. And the less iron we have in our blood, the less our muscles can close off those arteries that are flushing out the uterus with blood. And so also someone who is attempting to get pregnant, who is actually the womb carrier, the uterus carrier, men can certainly steam even if they're attempting to get pregnant, or a female partner of someone who is attempting to get pregnant can certainly steam. But if the person themselves who is attempting to implant an egg in their uterus would not want to steam post-ovulation when there is the possibility that that egg has implanted in the uterus. And so they could steam prior to ovulation. And actually steaming is very beneficial to women who are having challenges with their fertility. And because one of the main reasons why women have challenges with their fertility is because our society does not support healthy menstruation. The beliefs and habits that we have that are acceptable and encouraged in our society are not conducive to healthy full menstruation. And so I always say to people, in order to understand this, so we all know that taking regular bowel movements is essential for the health of our body. Imagine if we had a culture that decided that we shouldn't ever um, we shouldn't have to take a bowel movement when our body have a bowel movement and let the bowel movement come out when our body when it was inconvenient for us, that we should plug it up until it was, and that we should determine in that way. Can you imagine the dis-ease that would happen if we were plugging up our intestines? And many people do, emotionally and with tension. But imagine if we were physically putting something in there to stop the natural bowel movement from coming out. Well, that's exactly what we're doing with our wombs, with our uteruses. And there is a natural flow and that is happening. And you know, there's all this shame, there's all this societal belief about menstruation that doesn't honor it for the sign of life-giving fertility, and doesn't support women to menstruators to care for their bodies in a way that's conducive to a healthy menstrual cycle and a healthy cycle of fertility. And there's all kinds of psychological and energetic ways that this part of our lives is neglected. And so steaming and the practices around steaming help to reestablish a healthy release. That is what menstruation is designed to do on all levels. And working with steaming practice really helps to develop a lifestyle around menstruation and around our fertility that is supportive to optimum fertility, clearing out backed up menstrual blood and other fluids, that these attitudes about shame about menstruation have sort of caused us to sort of hold inside and not fully release. And for many women, for many, many years, from the point that they first started menstruating, ignorance around our actual fertility because we're not really taught or initiated completely, all kinds of shame, all kinds of, not to mention sexual assault or abuse, just binds those tissues up in contraction and contortion, and doesn't facilitate the full monthly release of blood that we're designed to have. And so the steaming helps to relax those contractions, release those emotional and spiritual, and you have to kind of release a lot of that shame to even make a time in your day to sit or stand over a pot of steaming herbs and nourish that part of your body. And so it really facilitates having a different way of being around menstruation, which is essential for optimum fertility. So, long way of saying steaming is good for fertility. With the awareness that if you are attempting to get pregnant, paying attention to when you're steaming in your cycle. So, and then, of course, steaming for a very young person who has not yet started menstruation, younger than 13 years old, would need to be a very, or even having started menstruation, but younger than 13 years old, would need to be a very gentle approach to steaming. So there's a gentle steaming approaches, and then there's more advanced steaming approaches. Once you get started in the practice, you can learn how to intensify and give yourself a more strong steaming session if it's right for what's going on in your body, with specific herbs based on listening to the messages that the womb is giving us. It's also wonderful for anyone who doesn't have a uterus, who wants to bring healing to this area of the body. So that's one of the big questions I get, is if I've had a hysterectomy, or My husband is having, um, you know, any number of issues in that area. Or, one time, and it doesn't even have to be in that area. One time, my husband had a terrible fever, and it was very emotional in nature. And I know that giving heat to a fever can sometimes break the fever, give the body what it needs, and then bring the fever down. And so we did a sacred steaming ceremony for my husband where we chose herbs that were going to help him with the emotional content and put our intentions in the pot of steam and sat him over the steaming pot. And sure enough, that fever broke very quickly and came down, and that was the end of the fever. And so, but it can be helpful if someone has had a surgery in the pelvic area after a certain phase of recovery from the surgery is complete. Steaming with herbs can assist that further recovery process. It's very helpful postpartum. Oh, but we're talking about people without wombs. Just postpartum and surgery. I kind of put that all together. Any major thing is really important. Steaming can be very helpful. Okay. So Gauri is asking if I can share which herbs to use for womb steaming. I will. In a moment, I'm going to complete this train of thought first, which is I also want to address that steaming is very helpful for people who have completed menopause or are in the menopausal process, because as I shared before, if we didn't listen to the messages of the womb until menopause, or only started to shortly before menopause and we're having menopausal symptoms, the steaming with the right herbs and the right approach can be tremendously helpful for that, because again, the herbs and the steam, the soothing practice, the attention practice, and the steaming time is a great time to bring in self-reflection and meditation, and just it brings us to meet that place with attention, and then the healing properties of the herbs to balance out. There's plenty of herbs that help us balance out our hormones, release the residue from not attending to this area of our body and to our systems and how it's interacting with all of our systems and interwoven with all of our systems. So working with someone who can help you, or using your own intuitive, or both, that's how I work, is encouraging and nourishing my clients into intuitive connection with the herbs to facilitate the body's natural, healthy transition into the beauty of menopause, and recognizing that the transition from fertility into menopause is just the very same kind of natural life transition as the one from being a young girl and transitioning into being a menstruating woman. And there's a lot of belief systems we have about menopause that bringing this kind of loving attention and herbal wisdom to can alleviate a lot of the physical symptoms that come out of that. So as far as herbs to use for steaming, my initial way that I work with people who want to learn how to steam is to ask them, what herbs do you have? What herbs and spices do you have in your kitchen that you regularly use for cooking? What herb teas do you use to drink that feel beneficial and healing to you? So we could have a little discussion with those of you who are on the call live who wouldn't mind being on the recording. If either Gauri or Laura would like to answer those questions, you could unmute yourself and share with me what herbs you have in your kitchen or garden or in tea bags that you use for cooking and making tea, and how you normally use herbs.
Generally, we use tulsi. Sometimes we have honey tea. Then sometimes we also use cinnamon.
For tea?
Yeah, sometimes
Uh-huh. So cinnamon, tulsi, and what was the other one?
honey.
Honey, like from bees.
Yes.
Okay, so honey is not so much an herb. Herb is a plant,
Yeah.
but you use honey in your teas, and honey is very medicinal for sure. But I would not necessarily add honey in a steam because, well, I don't know. You could try it, but those herbs, tulsi and cinnamon, would also be very good for steaming under certain circumstances. Cinnamon is really good for increasing circulation. Tulsi is considered to be an adaptogen herb, which is beneficial for all of our systems in our body without harming any of them. So either one as single herbs or as a formula together would be an excellent start if you wanted to try steaming with those herbs. Now, as far as, and so that's a great place to begin. Anything that you would normally drink that you know is beneficial and delicious to you as a tea, or that you would normally cook with, as long as you're not in one of those categories of contraindication that I mentioned earlier, as long as you're not bleeding currently, or as long as you don't bleed twice in a month.
Okay. One thing I would like to ask is some of the herbs can be a bit hot. Like yesterday, when we discussed, you mentioned that sometimes the pain also could be due to inflammation. So we
Yes,
need some cooling herb.
we need to what?
We need some cooling herb.
And you might have an instinct about that. And so, uh, a lot of people drink mint tea, and mint is a very cooling herb. And if you are having hot flashes as well, um, mint is very good for that. Mint is good for inflammation, but also cinnamon and ginger, these more hot herbs, and even cayenne are also excellent for bringing down inflammation, which is more of somewhat of a homeopathic thing where when the body is bringing heat to a certain area that's inflamed, it's because that heat is needed for the healing process. Heat stimulates the healing process. So the body will cause inflammation, and it's a healing thing. It's bringing healing fluids to the area. Well, if you give the body that heat through a heating herb like ginger or cinnamon, then the body doesn't have to continue providing that heat through inflammation. Does that make sense?
But would the hot herbs not make the bleeding excessive?
Well, as long as you're not bleeding, uh, like when you were bleeding and had to go to the hospital, is it because you kept bleeding for longer than 4 days and it wouldn't stop? Or was it because of the pain?
It was because of the pain, and there is no medical diagnosis for the pain I went through. So it's only because of the pain.
Okay, so if you're not already bleeding excessively, uh, the steaming probably won't make you bleed excessively, and the heating herbs would bring more circulation into the area to help heal whatever is causing the pain. Now, at least that's my experience with the heating herbs, is that they're very effective for pain. But if your intuition is telling you that you need more cooling herbs, then I would listen to that over anything that I'm saying. Because if your body's saying, you know what, I'm not sure I want to steam with these heating herbs, I want to steam with the cooling herbs, then get yourself some mint and and the tulsi is more of a cooling herb. And so, again, though, anything that you would uh, eat or drink is going to be safe to do with the steaming.
Okay. That was my logical mind speaking. I'll have to look into it. I'll have to sit and tune into it, that which would be a better herb for my
Right.
case.
Right. And just feel your intuition and ask your womb. And so that's a great way to start. Now, if you wanted to really have help to interpret the details and the exact instructions and get support with listening to that intuitive guidance from your womb, but also include the information that we've learned as we're reclaiming these practices and working with lots of women. I have a whole menstrual cycle analysis where we really look at the details of what's been going on with your menstrual cycle, and then we look at some specific herbs that have specific effects and energies that could be a good match for specifically what's going on for you. But for a beginning start, these are some of the ways that you can go about it on your own. And that's the beauty of steaming, is that it's something that anybody can do with their own intuition, with their supplies in their own kitchen and in their own garden. And how did we learn how to use herbs and what their properties were to begin with? The herbs spoke to us. So I'm going to be creating courses to facilitate people learning how to listen to the voices of the herbs, to the voices of their own intuition that you can access. And there's, plenty of information about that out there. And it sounds like you already have practices that facilitate that. And just remembering that we can learn about the herbs in our logical mind, and it often causes a shift or requires a shift in how we think about things logically, right? We've learned certain belief systems about how things work, and those are flawed and exclude a whole set of understanding that we need to learn if we're going to heal our femininity, because it's been that logical thinking has excluded feminine wisdom for far too long. So we can build that bridge between the logical thinking mind and new understandings or renewed understandings of feminine health, and include that in how we look at things logically. And then we can create a bridge between that kind of understanding with our inner knowing, our intuition, our ancient ancestral connection with the plants. And it's usually starts to both confirms each other. And then we can learn more information and then create that about new herbs that we're not familiar with, and create that intuitive connection with those herbs. So even though an herbalist like myself might say, oh, this or that herb might be good for it, and your intuition might be saying, actually, maybe something different. And then we work together in that way. So, Laura, before I get to your question, Laura, Gauri, you still had some other questions. How long to do womb steaming at one time, and frequency? What is the best period to do womb steaming, 1 week before or immediately after menses? So if it's your first time steaming, the recommended protocol is for no longer than 10 or 15 minutes, just to give your body the chance to experience this for the first time, and then feel how it feels. And as far as frequency, it really depends on what you're working on. If you've got some severe issues, and like it sounds like you do, where you've got some severe pain and some intense energies, you could really listen to your intuition and steam every day from here until your next cycle if you wanted to. If it brought on your menses, then that's when you would stop. If it brought on your menses very early, then you might consider not doing it so frequently next month. And if it brought on too much menstruation, then you would want to we could look at different herbs to use that would fortify the womb and not create so much menstruation that it's excessive. So so usually that everyday kind of steaming takes place after you've had a consultation with a facilitator like myself, where we do the full menstrual cycle analysis. We look at everything that's going on for you and come up with a protocol that is likely to be helpful for you. So just on this call, where I haven't had the chance to do that whole menstrual analysis, I don't know that I would recommend daily steaming until we'd already done that, to make sure that it's not going to potentially cause excessive bleeding based on your history and what we know about that. But you can use your intuition and decide on your own and take full responsibility for that. So if your body you do your first steam and your body is saying, oh my gosh, I need to do it again, and you do it again the next day and your body's still saying, oh my gosh, we need to do this every day, then I just want you to know that that is a common protocol for people who are having intense healing that needs to happen. But it's closely monitored, and sometimes, there's different days, recommendations for when to stop, what day of the cycle to stop the daily steaming, to allow a rest before menstruation and that kind of thing. So that could be something that we could have a more in-depth consultation about. As far as the frequency, again, that comes out of, and in general, like, you could do it just for maintenance. If you have a healthy cycle, then what women do for maintenance, if you have a healthy menstrual cycle, which means 4 days of healthy red menses with no clots, no cramping, no fibroids, and there's no hesitant starting or stopping with spotting before it really starts or spotting after it ends, no brown blood or black blood or other colors of blood, and no infections and none of these other symptoms. If you had a really healthy cycle that was not indicating any imbalances, then you might just do one steam in the middle of the cycle somewhere, perhaps, and a steam at the end of the menstruation to help facilitate and encourage completion from the menstrual cycle, from the bleeding. And then that protocol would change if you had other symptoms, menstrual symptoms. And certainly if you're experiencing severe pain and fibroids and things like that, then we would need to, again, have a consultation to support you in possibly, or you could listen to your own body's intuition about how frequently to do this. And the same is true for your other questions. So I hope that answered all of your questions, Gauri. Just let me know if there's any more about that you're curious about or uncertain about.
Answered most of my questions. And instead of herbs, if we use essential oil, how good that would be?
Essential oils are a little strong, actually a lot strong. So it's very easy to, and they go very quickly into the steam and can be too strong for the sensitive tissues of the sensitive vaginal tissues. So I don't use essential oils. But
okay, essential oils never recommended, only herbs.
Yeah, because in the herbs, the essential oils are in there, but they're bioavailable. They're the amount of herbs you're going to be able to fit into a pot isn't going to give you too much essential oils onto your skin. Okay, unless of course you're using cayenne pepper, which I wouldn't recommend, even though it's very good topically for inflammation. Cayenne pepper might be too strong, even in a steam. You know, you wouldn't put cayenne pepper in a bath because it might be too strong for your sensitive mucous membranes. So, but you might put it on topically on your knee or your elbow or your back, and that would be okay. But to sit in it with your sensitive vaginal tissues in the bath or with a steam, that would be too much because it's too strong. But other plants, the amount that you're going to put into a pot, a couple tablespoons or even a cup, is going to be not enough to produce too strong of essential oils in the steam. Whereas you can easily get too much of those essential oils, pouring them out of a dropper bottle into the water, and then that can become irritating to the skin and to your vaginal tissues. So, yeah, although I've heard other people talk about using certain essential oils that are, you know, like lavender is less irritating and more soothing, and, you know, that might not, you might be able to get away with a drop of lavender in your steaming pot. But in general, it's a little too strong. So, anything else about that, Gauri?
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. I look forward to hearing how your steaming experience transpires. And so Laura's question of what herbs we recommend for a yeast infection. So there is a whole set of herbs that are disinfecting. Okay. So there's a long list of herbs that have long history of disinfecting properties. And steaming for yeast infection can be helpful. However, it can sometimes, if you're in that burning, itching phase, adding more moisture, more heat, it can exacerbate the infection. So it's different. It's going to be different for different people, depending on the overall evaluation of their overall health and the nature of the imbalance that is producing the yeast infection. So with somebody who's having, if you just have a one-off yeast infection that's an odd thing, and you don't have overall heat conditions in general, like hot flashes and other kinds of infections, and and it's not a chronic thing, then it's probably safe to go ahead and try a short steam with some gentle disinfecting herbs, perhaps. Lavender is a good one for disinfecting. Basil, oregano, rosemary are all lovely disinfecting herbs that that you might have just in your kitchen. There are more medicinally disinfecting herbs that you wouldn't use necessarily in cooking because they don't taste that great, but that also means that they're more strong medicinally. But in order to, I would say to use those kinds of herbs, we would want to sit down and have a consultation and really look at the overall picture. But like I say, for people who are just doing this themselves, using their intuition, anything you would cook with or drink a tea of, or anything that you would get an over-the-counter remedy for your yeast infection, an herbal remedy. Sometimes there's these essential oil blends, but again, we wouldn't want to use that. I've tried that before. There was an essential oil blend. You were supposed to put it on a tampon and these, oh my gosh, it was so painful. Woo-wee. Essential oil is not happy in the vaginal area. No. Especially directly on. So, but you could look at the ingredients of those yeast away blends and like I think geranium was in one, and actually that one. It was the tea tree oil that was really painful. Uh, the geranium, I had a yeast away essential oil blend that actually was not painful directly on the vaginal tissues, but that was before I learned. I think I would much prefer steaming, because just inserting the tampon with the essential oils on there was uncomfortable, and having it in there was uncomfortable, even if the essential oils were helpful and not irritating. Just that was not comfortable, and I eventually stopped all practices like that, because then I found how to heal myself from the inside so that I wasn't as susceptible from the infection. So again, so if it's a one-time thing, you never really have them, then trying a steam like that. If it's a chronic thing, then that's a sign of chronic heat in the system, and steaming may or may not help whatever the herbs are that you have. And so that's when you're really going to want to take that as a sign to look at the overall imbalances that infection, that repeat infection, is trying to clue you into, and get some assistance with holistic healing, because doctors, all they give you is, medical doctors, usually all they do for your yeast infections, even if it's chronic, is to give you some kind of antifungal that you're supposed to insert. And those types of things that are just meant to kill off the overgrowth of whatever bug is causing the infection doesn't necessarily get to the root cause of why you're susceptible to those infections. And so, which often has more to do with the overall health of your digestive system, your microbiome, your stress levels, the health of your tissues in general, because when we're healthy, we don't get those kinds of infections. We get those infections when we're unhealthy for some reason. And that could be emotional stress, dietary, and those needs can change over time, and those types of infections are assigned to look into that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. All right. So let's see what time it is. Okay. Any other questions about sacred womb steaming? And I'll just share, and to give some time and space for other questions to arise, that something I wanted to really share about is that as I explored womb steaming more, I've combined it with various meditation and movement practices to integrate the physical steam and herb absorption process that is happening with the intuitive, emotional, and spiritual connection that can be fostered in that 10 to, once you get into the advanced approach, possibly even 30-minute time that you're sitting there receiving the steam. And so I've developed meditation courses with recorded meditations to listen to. And I've used various recorded meditations while I'm steaming. And I've also, I also have a vocal meditation practice, chanting and improvisational sounding, toning practice that goes really well with sacred steaming. Listening to beautiful music, sound healing, and participating in those vocally while you're steaming is a lovely practice. And then if you really want to get into healing specific patterns, emotional and spiritual patterns, particularly ancestral healing, because many of our womb-centered ailments are very related to ancestral patterns that can retain their potency in our lives and influence our lives in sometimes unbeneficial ways, even if we've addressed a lot of our current life patterns and lifestyles. that are at the root cause. And sometimes it becomes very difficult to address our current life, here and now, lifestyle patterns without addressing the ancestral patterns that we're dealing with, without actually saying, okay, I keep repeating this pattern in my life despite my awareness of it, despite my attempts to change it, to make practical choices and decisions about it. Boy, it still keeps popping up. That's usually a sign that there is some ancestral pattern that's become a blueprint for your life that's very difficult to change unless we deliberately go through. I practice visionary meditation with my clients and with myself, where we deliberately open the womb portal and travel along the energetic line between wombs down through the maternal lineage to the ancestor that had the originating trauma or experience that is perpetuating this blueprint that keeps popping up, calling for healing, for our healing attention. So this is often what I work with my clients and with my students, and I'll be producing a course very soon about herbal ancestral healing with herbs that will include steaming and other practices to facilitate, to combine herbal healing methods with ancestral healing practices as well, with recorded guided meditations and perhaps some live group and individual sessions mixed in with the course. And it's very powerful to go back to that source ancestor and sort out what the wounding is, what the wounded pattern is of coping with that pattern, and find the wisdom and reclaim the wisdom from that original wounding and bring that forward. And then that's when we start to heal, have a healing effect on all of our relations, 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, as and the 7 generations is just a number to talk about that, and a sacred number and a traditional number in Native American teachings. But I feel it goes beyond that those ripples that we make by shifting those energies and reclaiming the wisdom from whatever difficulty, whatever trauma occurred in our ancestral lineage, and start weaving that into our lives. It weaves into the lives past and future of all of our relations and out through the family tree, and it has amazing effects. I've had powerful experiences in my life of just focusing in on that for myself, doing those healing processes, and then hearing reports of members of my family far removed that are having huge changes and shifts in their lives that feel directly related, that pattern shifted for them as well. And that in my visions and in my downloads from spirit about this healing work, that's what I see, is that as each of us, those of us who feel called to deeply dive into these types of practices, are sort of spreading this balm out across our family tree and anyone that they touch, and it has this rippling out effect. So it's very powerful to dive into those practices, and steaming is a wonderful time in receiving that nourishment, that uprising, life-giving nourishment from Mother Earth through the steam. And so in this biomystical spirituality, where we see the earth, the planet Earth, Mother Gaia, as this living being that we're all a part of, a cell in the body of this divine living being, and that one of the ways that we're nourished by Mother Earth is this uprising energy that comes upwards through the plants. The plants are always growing up towards the sky. And then when we receive that medicine from the plants and put it in the steam, it's physically rising up. And that mimics the energetic of the rising up energy of Mother Earth. And as we receive that through the steam, it's profoundly healing and nourishing for us in so many, many ways. And it reconnects us with that source of vitality and life-giving energy deep in Mother Earth. And so I absolutely love combining these types of meditations and reflections with the steaming practice. And so any other questions before we wrap it up here? All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and those of you who are watching the recording and those of you who are here, thank you as well. If you'll be hearing, keep an eye out on my with the newsletter that you subscribe to for the Womb Centered Healing Temple. When you signed up for this summit, you'll receive ongoing announcements about the upcoming courses. Currently, there's one course called Inner Goddess, Awakening the Inner Goddess, or something like that, which is a womb steaming course that talks about womb steaming, some of the principles I shared here, but also shares a series of guided meditations to help you while you're steaming to get in touch with your inner maiden, mother, and crone energies. So really harmonizing these energies and how they cycle through our monthly cycle as well as our entire life cycle and the seasons of the year. So it's a powerful meditative experience to find those, to begin a conversation with those inner archetypes and start receiving the wisdom of our inner maiden, mother, and crone while we're steaming. And there's herbs. I've created herbal formulas for the maiden, the mother, and the crone that go with that too, that you can order through the Womb Centered Healing Temple website. So if you're interested in finding out how to sign up for that course, there's two ways. You can just purchase the course one time, and you could also become a member of the Womb Centered Healing Temple, which would give you access for a monthly fee. You get access to that course and all the other courses and all the summit materials and everything else that's on that site. So that's really a lovely option. And all future courses that I make and all future summits that I make, as long as you retain your membership. So that's another option. So I look forward to hearing from you if you're considering and are interested in any of that. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and look for the replay if you want to see this again on the replay page. Until next time, that's all for now.